Otherwise, you'll find that your series is exploding. So when you work with the dynamic panel data, ensure that this value of the beta, the absolute value of the beta is less than 1. Otherwise, the series will become, uh, you know, the series will explode it, and it's something like, stationarity or non-stationarity with AR1 process. In this model, UI is not specifically assumed, whether it is fixed or random that you can assume. Given the realistic assumption, we will allow mu I to be correlated with exogenous variables. And when you allow mu I to be correlated with exogenous variable, which is a more realistic assumption, then you can make use of FE estimator. So most of the estimator which we get in dynamic panel data, they allow for FE. We are also making a normal assumption about this error term. Okay, that is, there is no correlation between this and this. That's what we are assuming. Okay, we are also assuming strict exogeneity between xi and the error term. Okay, that's what we are assuming throughout in our discussion. So I'm assuming that this may be correlated with, and you can go for fixed effect. And I'm also assuming that error term and X, they are not strictly endogenous, they are strictly exogenous. Okay. Okay, revisiting our model of the dynamic panel, this is one. And if you want to take care of it, by taking difference, because when you take a difference, what will happen? This two will be cancelled out and you will be left with this. And just by taking the difference, you can take care of cross-sectional unobserved heterogeneity. Okay, right? Now, if you work with this model, do you see any problem? Now, please recall your basics about what we have talked about in the morning. Please understand this. It can be shown that I'm using delta YIT for YIT minus YIT T minus 1. And similarly, I'm using a delta sign for others. Okay, right? This, 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 this. Think of this. Look at this and try to appreciate what's happening to them. Delta YIT vis-a-vis with delta I T. And you will appreciate that my effort to throw out unobserved heterogeneity effect from our model will not provide us a solution. Our model will still have a endogeneity problem because this change will have correlation with this. And why correlation? Because this YIT minus 1 is correlated with YIT minus 1. And that leads to problem of endogeneity. Okay. Since the error term is correlated with one of the regressors, there will be a problem of endogeneity and estimators will be inconsistent estimators. So what is the way out? Way out is make use of instrumental variables, and that was the motivation because of which we talked about instrumental variable and before the break. Now the biggest challenge is how to obtain a instrumental variable in case of a dynamic panel data. Okay. Prashant Gupta is saying correlation between difference lag and dependent variable and the error term. Prashant, you are absolutely right. And that is the cause of the concern for us. And that's what we have to take care of. And we have to take care of by introducing a instrumental variable. And now is the challenge. How to get those instrumental variable. A lot of research is being done and is still going on. People are trying to get better and better instrumental variable so that you can have so-called best estimates. Two main way to develop a model to address endogeneity in the models: build instrumental variables at levels, that is y, or build instrumental variables in terms of difference, delta y. So researchers are going on and they are trying to build instruments by making use of y and its lag. Some are building up instrumental variable by using delta y and its lags. And friends, some people are using both of them to develop instrumental variables. Okay, so we will have how the things are evolving over a period of time and where we stand in terms of estimator as of now. Okay, so our story of instrumental variables in a dynamic panel starts with the research work of Anderson and Chow. They suggested that earlier period lags can be used as instrumental variables. And that was a great relief to all the users of dynamic panel data. Because earlier everyone was trying to find out where are the instrumental variables, and they said that you can make use of you can make use of uh, instrumental, you can make use of the earlier period lags as instrumental variables. Okay, so they suggested this equation and difference equation they have taken to take care of the fixed effect. They propose using either the first difference or level of the second leg of the dependent variable, that is this or this, as an instrument for delta yit minus 1. They suggested this. And these are the commands which you can make use of for running the methodology of Anderson and Chow. And friends, I'm not devoting much time to it because it has a lot of problems which have been proved by further research, the later research in literature. There are some problems with the use of Anderson and Chow estimators, hence we normally do not use them. One of the problem is how to specify and define instrumental variables. Should we take y lags? Should we take delta y lag? The research was silent. How many lags we should take? 1, 2, 3. That's again we are silent about it. And that's the problem. Arellano Bond in their paper 1991 came out with the different view about instrumental variables. And in their paper, they showed that Anderson-Chow estimator delivers consistent results, but not efficient estimates of the parameters in the model. This is due to the fact that the instrumental variable does not exploit all available movement conditions. And that's why Anderson-Chow methodology is not being used these days, because they prove that it may give you consistent results but may not give you the efficient results. So we are looking for an estimator that is consistent as well as efficient. Anderson and Chow estimators are consistent, but they're not efficient. Then we got some solution from Arellano Bond 91 paper, and they suggested use of generalized methods of movement or GMM. Starting point for this estimator is take the first difference, okay, and use instrumental variables, and they define instrumental variables in terms of level, okay, like here yi1, yi2, yi1. They did not define instrumental variables in terms of delta. They define instrumental variables in terms of level. Okay, so for 1 and 2, we don't require any instrumental variables. For delta I1 to yi1, for I13, two instrumental variables, y12 as well as yi1. Delta yi4, we use three instrumental variables, yi3, yi2, and yi1, like this. So they suggested that that's the way you can identify instrumental variables and you can use them. And if you use them, you will get efficient estimates. Okay. Friends, I would like to take you back to what is called a generalized method of movements, which is called GMM. I do not know how many of you have heard about it and what it is and how do we understand by it. Any one of you would like to guess what is GMM? Okay. Recall our discussion about instrumental variables. And one of the condition of the instrumental variable is that the instrumental variable Z and the error term should be 0. And if we are going to use 5 instrumental variables, you will get 5 such conditions, which are popularly called movement conditions. Sorry, movement conditions. In a crude sense, you can visualize generalized method of movement as one which satisfies the movement conditions of some system of equations, like here. Okay, and it's a generalized method, and least square method is a particular type of GMM method, generalized method of movement. Okay, this method gives you estimators in assuming that whatever movements you are looking forward for population, those movements can be estimated from sample information. That the basic understanding about GMM. So in dynamic panel data methodology, you will find people are making use of instrumental variables plus GMM estimators. And this GMM estimators takes conditions, the movement conditions, which are coming from instrumental variables. How much instrumental variables we are supposed to take? You need not to worry about it. We will discuss it later on. But we have to take instrumental variable in such a manner that the system is neither over-identified nor under-identified. And what is over-identified, under-identified, we will understand those terminology. What is generalized method of movement? Assume that regresses X are correlated with the error term, then we create it creates a problem of indigeneity and inconsistent estimates. So we are looking for instrumental variable so that the expected value of that instrumental variable multiplied by error term is zero. And this provides a unconditional population movement conditions. And generalized method of movement GMM gives you estimator satisfying these population conditions in the sample. So estimators satisfying these conditions for the sample data are called your GMM estimators. Okay. Instrumental variable is a variable, and GMM movement gives you an estimator. That's a methodology through which you can determine estimates of your parameters. Instrumental variable is not a methodology, it's a variable. GMM is a methodology that gives you estimators. So, Group Priya, I think that's clear to you. Okay. Aluminum bond estimators are known as difference GMM because we are taking differences and using instrumental variable for differences. They are called difference GMM estimators as they use instrumental variables for the first difference equation, which takes care of individual specific effects. That is to say, in it, the instrumental variables are defined for the difference variables. And that's why it is called a difference GMM estimator. And please again note that all the instrumental variables are defined at level. These estimators may be one-step adenoma bond estimators or two-step adenoma bond estimators. In the two-step estimator, one uses the residuals of the first step for the estimation of the second step. And that gives you more information for estimation. And when you have more information, your estimates will be more efficient. So two-step estimators are more efficient than one-step estimator. And normally we prefer two-step estimators in our methodology. And these are the commands which you can use in Stata for Arduino bond estimators. Again, now we have problems and with this, so we are not going to discuss in detail. We will discuss some new method which are more robust and gives better results. But before that, let's try to understand what I mean by over identification problem. And Sargon test is test for over identification or over identification problem. Okay, so friends, understand what we mean by identification. If the number of parameters to be estimated are more, suppose your betas are more than number of equations. Like just for simplicity's sake, I take x plus y is equal to 10. Okay, one equation but two unknowns. So if you have one equation, two unknowns, then you will find you may not be able to get a solution for it. Okay, in that case we say the problem is not identified, because the parameters which are going to estimate are more than the number of equations you have. Problem it not identified, or you can call it under identified. If the number of parameters to be estimated is exactly equal to the number of equations, then we have exactly identified system, and in that case you will get one unique solution, right? If the parameters to be estimated are more, sorry, if the number of parameters of to be estimated are less than the number of equations, then we have over identification. And Sargon test is a test for over identification. Okay, so over identification means you still have a solution, but you may not get a you know unique solution, right? And over identification will unnecessarily make your model complex one. So try to avoid over identification in your problem. Okay, so should we use difference GMM estimators and Rayleigh bond estimators? The answer is no, because it has its own problems. Different GMM estimators may be biased and imprecise because of the double lagged level instruments are used for the first difference equations. And Blendell Bond 1988 paper said instruments used in the first difference GMM estimator become less informative, hence perform poorly in two important cases. First, at the value of the autoregressive parameters increases towards unity, and second, at the variance of the individual specific effects increases related to the variance of transitory shocks, the error term. So in that case, you will find out the model does not work properly. Further, they said that different GMM estimators use weak instrumental variables, which are not giving us good instruments. Okay. Now let me define what is a weak instrumental variable. An instrumental variable is said to be weak instrument if instrumental variables are weakly correlated with endogenous variables for which these instruments are used. So we are not, if you work with weak instrumental variables, your quality of estimates will not be good. And that was precisely the problem with the Arenono bond estimator. Okay. Vijay Singh is asking what kind of example, I don't know, you want to get. Suppose I have a covariance of Z one, which is instrumental variable with error term, let's say it's 0.50. Covariance of Z2 with error term is 1.26. Obviously, Z2 is more stronger than Z1. So Z1 you can say is a weak instrumental variable with regard to your um, with regard to the independent variable for which you are going to use instrumental variables. Instrument weak means it has low correlation with error term. That's the idea behind weak instrumental variables. Then we have what is the way out? Erinolo Boer and Blundell Bond criticized the different GMM estimators as they provide weak instrumental variables, less efficient, and they may give you biased and imprecise results in some cases. So they suggested that you should go for system GMM estimators rather than difference GMM estimators. So friends, whatever estimators were developed earlier than system GMM, we are not we don't use them because they have one problem or the other problem. So normally nowadays we go for system GMM estimators. Now the question is, what are they? The system GMM estimators, we make a system of the following two equations. Equation which is defined at level and equation which is defined at difference. And when you use two equations, level and difference, obviously you have more information and obviously you will get better and efficient estimates. The advantage of the system of the equation is that it allows the inclusion of more instrumental variable. For original level equation, we introduce lag difference instrumental variables, and for the lagged one, we use for the difference one, we use lagged instrumentals. So for this, we use lagged instrumentals of the delta y it, and for delta y it, we use lags of yit. Okay, so you are using more instruments and you are using more information, and it is expected your estimators will be more efficient and better estimates. System GMM is designed for dynamic short panels. System GMM may minimize data loss by using what is called forward orthogonal deviations instead of first differences. What is it? Pratik will discuss as he talks about the methodology. Instruments must be exogenous and not should be greater than n the cross-sectional units. System GMM may take care of the following conditions: endogenous variables due to joint determination with dependent variable. That means dynamic panel endogeneity can be taken care of. Heteroscedasticity within group cross-sectional units and autocorrelation within group. And now you can see the advantage of it. And therefore, system GMM is more powerful tool in estimating parameters in our dynamic panel. So we prefer to use it over the other estimators. So we shall use XTA bond 2 as given by Rudman, and this that it's not inbuilt Stata command. You have to install it, and for installation you need internet. Okay. But friends, this also has a problem, and that's the reason we are not going to talk about in detail. It has been shown that XTA bond to XTDP, which are the command in Stata, based on system GMM, have led to incorrect results when combined with standard instruments. And because of these problems, XTA bond to XTDP, it is not advisable to use them. Then you might be wondering, I'm saying don't use it, don't use it. Then what to be used? That what we are finally concentrating on. And that takes us to what is called a command xtdpdgmm. And now I request Pratik to take over, share this screen, and he will explain this particular command and how to use this command. So Pratik, please share the screen. Sadesh is asking if there is a different the meaning of lag in terms of time series and panel data. No, no difference. We are using in the same terminology and the same in the same sense. And Sebastian is the person who has developed this XT DPD GMM module for uh, for doing a dynamic panel data analysis. Okay. Uh, Eva Eva is asking, can we increase the number of cross-sectional units by increasing dummy? No, dummy is a variable. When I say n, I'm talking about cross-sectional units and not the variable. Okay. Pratik, please start.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. This is indeed a privilege for me to share whatever little knowledge I have of dynamic panel estimation with you today. So, I would just like to confirm whether my audio is clear and whether you people are able to view my screen. Can anyone please?
Your audio is clear, Pratik sir.
Okay, okay. And my screen is also in front of you all.
No, no, the screen is not here.
स्क्रीन आ तो रहा है पुरुषोत्तम?
This is not a screen of.
ये प्रतीक का ही है.
My
Okay,
screen.
okay, okay, okay,
I,
okay. Thank you, Pratik. Sorry for that.
okay, no problem.
Mistake.
I am basically picking up from where sir has just left, and the entire objective of my discussion is to equip you with implementation of XT-DPT GMM based on system GMM estimator in Stata. So for the next hour or so, I'll be talking about this command, how to implement it, what are the limitations, and what are the points that we need to take care of while estimating dynamic panel models using this command called XT-DPT GMM. So let's start. So the person you see on your screen right now is the man behind this command, XTDPT GMM, Professor Sebastian Pivgans. And he is the one who actually identified and decided to address the issues which we had with XTA Bond 2. So the basic problem with XTA Bond 2 is that whenever we include time dummies, the degrees of freedom which are calculated in order to estimate standard errors for the coefficients, these degrees of freedoms are not calculated correctly, and that is why the standard errors which we get.
Pratik sir, your voice is very low and is not audible properly. So please adjust your mic.
Is it better now?
It is better now.
अच्छा है.
All right. So I will not use my earphones then, and I will use the microphone of the laptop itself. All right. So yeah. So I was talking about the limitation of XTA bond 2. So the degrees of freedom, which are calculated in order to estimate the standard errors of the coefficients. So there is a problem in that calculation of degrees of freedom, because of which the hypothesis testing process becomes problematic, and we cannot actually rely on the Z statistic as well as the corresponding p values that we get out of XTA bond 2. Now, this command is a user-written command, xtdpd-gmm, which not only addresses this problem of calculation of degrees of freedom in XTA bond 2, but also offers various additional features in dynamic panel estimation, which we will see further. Now, since this is a user-written command, it is not a system command which is available in Stata by default when you install it. You will have to install it separately. And in the next slide, I show you how you can install this command. And in fact, I hope you must have received a mail from the conference organizers regarding the installation of this command. So I hope all of you have installed this command. And so basically on your screen right now, you see two methods of installing this command. So the first command that you see, net install xtdptgmm. So I basically recommend you to always install your xtdptgmm command using this first command on the screen. Reason being, it is regularly updated by the author, and the latest version will be available always from this command, that is from this link, www.caribbeans.de/stata. So you can use this command. Other than that, there is a delayed version. So if let us say any changes are made to the command, then they also get incorporated in the SSC directory. But there is a delay in that, so you can in fact use the command mentioned below also, if you're not about the if you're not concerned about the recent changes which have been made to the command. So I hope all of you have installed this command. I will now move forward. Right. So now for any
Pratik, now
command,
go
especially
slow.
user.
Go slow.
Okay. So with regard to any command, whether it is a command or a user written command, it is always the first step to understand the syntax of the command so that we can apply it, and we can analyze various options which are available in that command. So for that, the best option is to learn from the source itself, and the source is always available in Stata in this command called help. So all the commands, whether user written commands or system commands, if you want to know and analyze and study the syntax of these commands, then what you can do is you can simply go to your command window and type help space the name of the command which you want to study. So let me type help space xtdpdgmm, and there you see the file gets open, and this is the help file for xtdpdgmm. So all the options, all the features along with their description, what do they mean, their limitations, advantages, everything is mentioned in this file. So although there are a lot of options available, but we'll be discussing the standard options, the basic ones, so that we get a hold of the command, and then we can obviously study the complicated options, or the detailed features which the command has to offer. Right, so now let me get back to my PPT. Right. Other than that, so if let's say the best part of commands that Stata, whether user run or system commands, is that whenever you have any doubt with regard to not only the features of the command, but also with regard to the concepts on which the command is based, you can always post a query on this dedicated platform called Stata List. I will just show you the same on the internet. How does it look? So this is the platform of Stata List, which is a recognized official platform of Stata, and all command creators, people who have contributed to Stata, they are readily available, and they answer your queries in real time. So this is basically the link for XTDPD GMM, which has obviously been started by Sebastian, and you can post any query at any point in time, and within 24 hours you will get a reply. So I have mentioned this
Pratik,
link in
just
the
hold.
PPT.
My research students have benefited by this forum, and a lot of their questions and even our questions are addressed on this particular platform. So whenever you are in problem, you place not related to dynamic panel, but any problem related to Stata and other issues related to estimation, you can refer to Stata forum. And I tell you, you will always get answers to your queries. Okay, maybe sooner, maybe later, doesn't matter, but I'm sure that you will definitely get some answers to your queries. So be start using this particular forum. Okay, please, Pratik, go ahead.
Yeah, right. So just to wrap up that point, so this is the Stata List forum. You can always create an ID and a password, and you can start posting your queries. regarding any doubts you have with regard to econometrics and Stata per se. Okay, so coming back to my PPT, I have mentioned the link of Stata list. You can access that. All right, so now let's basically start with a data set and let's start estimating a dynamic panel by using XTDPT GMM directly. So, right, so this is the Stata software. I will now open a file, a data set which I have shared with you. It is based on determinants of cash holdings. So it is an Excel file. I will go to File, Import, Excel spreadsheet, Browse, and I'll open this file called dataset for determinants of cash holdings. I hope you must have received this file, so you can also open it and you can do the analysis simultaneously with me. Right, so I will import the first row as variable names and I will click OK. Right, so the data set has been loaded and on the right hand side in the variables window, you can see the variables are appearing now. And the first step, whenever we do panel data analysis, the first step is to identify our cross-sectional ID as well as our time ID. So this is what we will do now. XT set, I will take company ID because company is my cross-sectional ID. So I'm working on firm level data. And here is my time ID. So I'm doing annual data. Right, so XT set company ID space here, and I will click enter. I will press enter, and the IDs have been defined. And as you can see that this data set is unbalanced. Why? Because we do have missing observations for certain variables for certain years. But that is absolutely fine because XTDPT GMM does not differentiate between balanced and unbalanced panel. So you can apply XTDPT GMM and for that matter, dynamic panel estimation in general for balanced as well as unbalanced panels. So there is no problem in that. Okay, so now let me just show you the data set so that theoretically we get a hold of it and we will then start estimating our model. So this is the Excel file of my data. So I have 16 years of data and I have this variable called cash holdings, the amount of cash and cash equivalents divided by total assets which a firm holds at any given year. And then there are determinants, potential determinants of cash holdings, which are leverage, the amount of debt, the proportion of debt, the that the company has, then the size, total assets of the company, liquidity, which is non-cash working capital, and then we have cash flow, which is the operating cash flow in a year, and then profitability, which is ROA. And then we have a time invariant variable also called industry, which does not vary across time for any given company, right? Okay, now let me come back to the command window and
Just
now.
hold. Let me explain the problem. The problem is we are looking for determinants of cash holding. And we believe that cash holding can be determined by leverage of the company, size of the company, liquidity of the company, operating cash flows, and profitability of the companies. And industry also has an important impact to the cash holding, and therefore we are taking dummy variables for the industry, and we believe that a company will remain in a particular industry. Therefore, it does not change with the time. Hence, we are calling it is time invariant. Okay, so I hope you get an idea about what the problem we are talking about. And we also believe that cash holding of today is a function of cash holding of the yesterday. Okay, so that leads to a dynamic panel data structure. Yes, Priti, go ahead.
Absolutely. So like sir has said, our objective is to find which are the variables which affect cash holdings. And we have a list of certain variables which we believe can potentially affect cash holdings. So now theoretically it has been proven and empirically also it has been shown that cash holdings follow a dynamic data generating process. So cash holdings today will affect cash holdings tomorrow. Why? Because let's say if a firm is having, a lot of cash today, then, this cash is expected, this high level of cash is expected to persist, in the forthcoming years. And, on the other end, let's say if a firm is facing if a firm is facing a deficit of cash, it has very low levels of cash, then obviously, chances of a turnaround and, the firm having high levels of cash, immediately in the next period are very low. So, the firm will try to accumulate cash, more cash, but, this will happen gradually. So, cash holdings, if they are low today, then we can also expect them to remain at lower levels in the future periods as well. So there is a cycle, there is a persistence which is present in the behavior of cash holdings. Okay, so now let's start. First of all, I will write the name of the command itself, that is xtdpdgmm. Let me also tell you, what do each of these letters mean. So X stands for cross section, T stands for time, that is for any panel data command which we have, XT stands for panel. Then DPD stands for dynamic panel data, and GMM stands for generalized method of movements. So always remember that this command is not using our usual OLS as its estimator, but it is based on generalized method of movements. Right, we'll in fact come back to this. So I write the name of the command, that is xtdpdgmm, in order to tell Stata that I am now calling this command and using it for the purpose of my analysis.
I
Then
just add XT for panel data, DPD for dynamic panel, and GMM is the method which you are going to use. And we have already discussed what is GMM. Okay.
right,
Yes, Pratik, go ahead.
absolutely. Yeah. So I write the name of the command first in order to call up this command xtdpdgmm, and now I will first introduce my dependent variable, that is cash holdings. Okay. So cash holdings 1 is the name of my dependent variable. So I write that. And then once I have written my dependent variable, now I will have to write my independent variables. So the syntax is such that the first variable which you write is considered to be the dependent variable. And after that, whichever variables you start writing, they are considered to be independent variables. So now, since this variable, this dependent variable cash holdings follows a dynamic data generating process, then obviously the first independent variable should be the lag of this dependent variable itself, right? So the lag of cash holdings itself. So what I will do is I will write L dot in order to indicate that I am using the lag of cash holdings as an independent variable. Okay, so I will use L dot, and then I will call this variable again, my dependent variable, that is cash holdings. So L dot cash holdings, this is our first independent variable, and rightly so, because we are assuming that cash holdings follows a dynamic data generating process. Right. Now let me write the other independent variables which I believe affect cash holdings one by one. So let me write size, that is log of total assets. Then let me also write liquidity, that is the amount of non-cash assets that a firm has. So basically, the current assets, like for example, you have accounts receivable, you have inventory. So these serve as substitutes for cash. So we believe that higher the amount of non-cash assets that a firm has, lower is the amount of cash holdings that a firm should have. So we basically expect a negative relationship between cash holdings and non-cash working capital. Okay. So I write liquidity 1, and finally, I introduce profitability, which in our case is return to assets. So I introduce profitability as one of the independent variables, and we believe higher the profits that a firm earns, higher should be the cash holdings, because if let's say a firm is earning a higher level of profit, then obviously a part of this profit would be in cash. And if let's say a firm is able to generate higher levels of cash profits year on year, then we can very well expect that other things being constant, this firm should have a higher level of cash. So we expect a positive relationship between profitability and cash holding. So we write profitability as an independent variable now. Okay. So, for simplicity purposes, I am, using a parsimonious model. So basically, I am now using only 4 independent variables, including the lag of the dependent variable, as potential regressors in my model. Okay. So once you are done with writing all your independent variables, all your regressors, you place a comma in order to tell Stata, in order to tell the command that you have already written all the independent variables which you wanted to. And now we will start giving different options in order to estimate our dynamic panel model using XTDPT GMM. So the first
Pratik,
option.
just 1 minute. Please, friends, note that to have options, you have to put comma. Anything you write after that comma, that means you are telling Stata that these are the options which have to be used while estimating the model. Okay, right? Now, Pratik, give the options.
Absolutely. And I would also just like to mention that as of now, you do not need to worry, or you do not need to take any sort of tension regarding the syntax of the command. You just focus on the concept, because syntax is readily available in the help file, as well as I have shared with you a Word doc which has details of the standard options which we use in XTDPT GMM command. So it has description of each option, when to use it, why to use it, what will it do. So you can always refer to that Word doc or the help file of XTDPT GMM whenever you are in doubt. Okay, so as of now, just focus on the conceptual understanding of this command. Okay, so after comma, the first option that I will write is two-step. Why? Because it gives us standard errors with a lower bias. They are in fact also more efficient as compared to the one-step estimation. So by default, most of the people who use XTDPT GMM, they simply follow two-step as a default procedure. So that is what we are going to do. So we use two-step because we have a lower bias of the standard errors, as well as a higher efficiency of these standard errors. Okay, so I write two-step, and then I write VCE bracket start cluster, and I will mention the company ID as well. Now, what have I done? So basically, in order to address any issues arising out of potential heteroscedasticity and autocorrelation in my error term, I have clustered my standard errors around the cross-sectional ID, which is company ID in my case. So again, this is a standard option which almost all people use while estimating a dynamic panel. Reason being, there is always a scope of heteroscedasticity as well as autocorrelation. And in fact, in our case, wherein the dependent variable is following a dynamic data generating process, there is every possibility that the error term will be autocorrelated. So what, clustering around the cross-sectional ID does is that it addresses the problem of heteroscedasticity as well as autocorrelation in one go. So again, this is a sort of a default option which everyone uses, and we should also use it. And in fact, if you want to check for heteroscedasticity and autocorrelation per se in your data set, there are commands for that also. So you can very well do that.
Uh, Pratik, one question, why industry is not taken as an independent variable?
Why?
Industry. I think you have missed the industry as an independent variable.
Right. So, see, industry, as we said, it is a time invariant variable. Now,
Right.
what happens is that in order to get rid of any potential endogeneity which might arise out of the correlation between the error term and these time invariant variables, what we are doing in system GMM is that we are transforming our original equation into a transformed equation. And how are we doing that? In the transformed equation, we are taking the first difference of our data set. And what will happen in the first difference? Each value of every variable for a particular year will be deducted from the value in the following year. Okay, so
Uh,
the Excel sheet.
right. Sugandha was asking this question. Sugandha, I tell you, when we work with the fixed effect, if you remember, all time invariant variables will be wiped out because we work with the difference, and difference removes invariant variables. So that's the limitation of the fixed effect, and that limitation is being carried here when you take the difference. Okay, I think that you have to understand.
Right. So, for industry doesn't change for a company across time. So for 2001, if a firm is in a particular industry called number one, then in the next year also it will remain in that same industry. So when we deduct the value of 2001, that is, let's suppose the industry code of one from the industry code which this company has in 2002, which is again one, then one minus one leads to zero. And similarly, for other time invariant variables also, such variables which do not vary across time for a given particular company, they are wiped out from the entire estimation process. All right. So that is why we are not taking industry as of now. Okay. So then two-step VCE cluster company ID. We have basically now addressed the issues of heteroscedasticity as well as any potential autocorrelation that might arise in our error term. Next thing, what we shall write is we shall include the time dummies. Okay, we shall include time effects. Now, just as we have variables which do not vary across time for a particular cross-sectional ID, there are also variables which vary across time, but they do not vary across cross sections. So for example, macroeconomic variables, GDP number for, let's say, a particular year 2006 shall be the same for all the companies, but it shall change from 2006 to 2007. So this is a variable. Macroeconomic variables are such that they vary across time, but for a given year, they do not vary across cross sections, across companies. So inflation is same for all the companies in a given year. Interest rates are same for all the companies in a given particular year. But yes, they do vary across time. Now the standard procedure is to include time dummies and eliminate their impact which they might have on a dependent variable from the model. Why? Because we do not want the impact of these macroeconomic variables, these cross section invariant variables, to actually let's say malign the effect of the betas of our other independent variables. So basically we want to remove the impact of macroeconomic variables in order to say that whatever impact, whatever betas we are getting for our independent variables, these are exclusive of the impact of macroeconomic variables. These are exclusive of the impact of any cross-section invariant variables. So in order to control for such macroeconomic variables and their impact, and to wipe out that impact from the betas of the other independent variables that we have, it is always advisable to include time dummies. And to include time dummies, what we write in our command is T effects. So T stands for time and effects is the time effect you have. Okay, so T effects, time effects, this is what we include. All right. And then now comes the most important and most tricky part of the command. Okay, we have discussed conceptually that system GMM estimator and this entire process of dynamic panel estimation addresses endogeneity, the issues arising out of endogeneity. But how does it do so? Now we discussed that there are potentially 4 reasons as to why endogeneity might occur. One is omitted variable bias, second is simultaneity, third is measurement error, and the fourth is dynamic relationship. So if there is any endogeneity arising out of the dynamic relationship, which are dependent variable shares with its lagged values, that has already been taken care of. Why? Because we have included the lag of the dependent variable as an independent variable. So that is done. The second most important reason and the most problematic issue which leads to endogeneity is a possibility of a dynamic relationship, a simultaneous relationship between our independent variables and our dependent variable. So let's say cash holdings and liquidity. Okay, so basically the amount of cash and cash equivalents that a firm has and the amount of non-cash working capital that a firm has. So what will we say? That is the amount of non-cash assets affecting the amount of cash that a firm has, or is it the other way around, the amount of cash and cash equivalents that a firm has affecting the non-cash working capital? So it can be both ways. Then similarly, let us say profitability. So in case of profitability, what will we say? Do firms with higher profitability have higher levels of cash, or do firms with higher levels of cash have higher profitability? Again, there is a possibility of a bidirectional relationship. So whenever you have a possibility, a theoretical possibility of such a bidirectional relationship, of such a feedback loop, with regard to your independent variable and your dependent variable, then you should ideally consider your independent variables as endogenous. Moreover, in fact, if you believe that you have omitted some variables from your model for xyz reason, and obviously these variables are now sitting in the error term, if you believe that any of your existing independent variable might be correlated with those omitted variables, then also you should consider your independent variable as endogenous. In fact, let me tell you that whether you are working in any discipline, finance, HR, marketing, almost all the time, the variables which we take on the right hand side of the equation, these independent variables, there is always a possibility of these variables being correlated with the omitted variables which we could not take in our model. And these omitted variables are sitting in the error term. Now if our existing independent variables are correlated with those omitted variables which are sitting in the error term, then obviously this will induce a correlation between the error term and the existing independent variables, and this is nothing but endogeneity. So that is why it is always a safer option to consider all your independent variables as endogenous. This is a thumb rule which I have learned from my experience. People have actually told me that whenever in doubt, consider your independent variable as endogenous. Okay, and now in this part of the command which we are going to discuss now, we will have to tell Stata that which variables are we considering as endogenous and which variables are we considering as exogenous. So there is a bracket called GMMIV. There is an option called GMMIV. We will open that option. We will open that bracket of GMMIV, and now we will start telling Stata as to which variables are we considering as endogenous or exogenous or predetermined. Let me also tell you what is a predetermined variable. So if you believe that the previous error term, that is the error term of the previous period, has a relationship with your independent variable today. So which means if you believe that the error term of the past has a correlation with the value of your independent variable in the present, then you should consider your independent variable as predetermined. So basically predetermined is nothing but a special type of endogenous variable itself, in which we are saying that it is not the contemporaneous value of the error term which is correlated with the independent variable. No, we are saying that the error term which was observed in the previous period, that might be correlated with the value of the independent variable which we have today. That is the current value of the independent variable. Okay, and by default, the system has been constructed in a way that the lagged value of the dependent variable is always predetermined. Why? Because the error term in the previous period is nothing but the residual part of cache holdings itself, and cache holdings follows a dynamic data generating process, which means that cache holdings yesterday definitely have an impact on cache holdings today. So by default, by construction, and there is a relationship between the error term in the previous period and the value of the cache holdings today. Okay, so by default, what we will do is that L dot cache holdings, which is the lag of the cache holdings which we have included as an independent variable, we will tell Stata that it is a predetermined variable. And how will we do that? First of all, gmem iv bracket start, we will write the name of the variable, that is L dot cache holdings. We will place a comma, and then we will now have to specify the lag length of the instruments which we want to be used as which we want to be used as instruments for this particular variable called L dot cache holdings. So we will have to specify the number of lags in the past, which should be used as instruments for L dot cache holdings, because we saw that in system GMM we have two equations, levels and first difference. So for levels equation, the lagged differences are used as instruments, and for the first difference equation, the lagged levels are used as instruments. So now we will have to tell Stata that how many prior lags of this particular variable should be used as instruments. And for that, we will write lag lag bracket start 0 0. Now, why am I writing 0 0? Because in case of predetermined variables, the best instrument which is available is at the same period in which we are working. The contemporaneous value of a particular variable in case of predetermined variables serves as the best instrument. So that's why we are starting our lag length at 0. And since this variable which is at point time t, since this variable works as the best instrument for the predetermined independent variables, we are not increasing our lag lengths further. We are keeping our lag length, the lag length criteria from 0 to 0. So the first 0 that you see is the starting lag length, and the next 0 that you see is the ending lag length. So for predetermined variables, it is always advisable to use 0 0 as starting as well as the ending lag length, right? So this is what we do. And then the next option which we write is model bracket start FODEV. So now see, we know for a fact that in system GMM, there is one level equations that we have, which is the base equation, and then we have a transformed equation, okay? And this transformation can be done in multiple ways. So one method is that we can transform the equation by taking the first difference, and the other option is by taking the forward orthogonal deviations. Now first understand that why are we transforming our equation in the very first place? We are transforming it because we want to get rid of all time invariant variables from our model. And first difference, what it does is that it calculates the first difference by deducting the value of the previous period from the current period. Okay, this is what I'm doing in my Excel. So let's say for industry, I am deducting the value today, that is the industry code 1, from the previous value, again, that is industry code 1. And this is how I generate the first difference of any particular variable, okay? And in this process, as you can see, the first year is obviously omitted. Why? Because there is no prior period available to this first period from which the differencing will take place. So 1 year is something which we lose. So 1 year's information of the first year is something which we lose while doing the first difference in our variables. And also there is another issue with first differencing, and that is, if there are missing values in your variables, then you will actually be losing a lot of information. Why? Let's say profitability. So the current value of profitability is 0.19469. Okay, now if I start doing the first difference of this particular variable, what will happen is that I will have to deduct the value of the previous period from this particular current value, and it will obviously give me an error. Why? Because the previous value is not present. It is a missing variable. It is a missing value, so there is missing information. And in fact, not only this, what will happen is that in this process we will not be able to use 2 years of information. Why? Because the value in which, so let us say we do not have a value for 2006 as of now, so we will not be able to use values for 2006, and also we will not be able to use values for 2007, because 2007 the first differencing of 2007 requires the value of 2006 as well. So in this entire process of first differencing, if we have missing values, if we have an unbalanced panel data set, like in my case, we get to lose a lot of information. because let's say if there is a missing value in a given particular year, it will not only lead to omission of that year from the analysis, but the following year also, because the following year, the first differencing depends on the value available in the previous year. So in this process, we get to lose a lot of information. Now, what is the solution? The solution is to use forward orthogonal deviations. And what will happen in forward orthogonal deviations is that for any given variable, so let me again, take the example of industry. For any given variable, what we will do is that, let us suppose we want to calculate a transformed value, or for, let's say, the first year. So what we will do is we will calculate the mean of all the forthcoming years. Okay, so for industry, what will I do is I will calculate the mean of the rest of the 15 years. I have 16 years of data. So in order to get the transformed value for the first year for industry variable, what will I do is I will deduct the mean of all the forthcoming values. Okay, all the values which are available in the forthcoming years. And this mean is something which now I will deduct from my current value, for which I want to calculate the transformed value. Okay, so now what will be the mean of all these 15 values which I have selected? Because all these values are 1, so the mean will also be 1. And when I will deduct this mean from the current value, I shall again get a value of 0. Why? Because for time invariant variables, since they do not vary across time, obviously their mean will also not vary across time. And in this process, we will be able to eliminate all time invariant variables in one shot, because this is the objective of transforming our equation, that we want to get rid of all time invariant variables in one go, so that any potential endogeneity arising out of these variables is eliminated. Okay, so for forward orthogonal deviations, what you do is that for the current value which we want to calculate, in the current year, the transformed value in the current year for any variable, we calculate the mean of all the forthcoming years, values of all the forthcoming years, and this is the mean which we deduct from the current value, and we arrive at the transformed value. And look, the advantage of this forward orthogonal deviations vis-a-vis the first differencing process is that you only lose one observation, and that is the observation of the last year. Why? Because for this particular firm, for 2016, we do not have any forthcoming years, because my data set ends at 2016. But for rest of the years, we have all the values. So let us in fact take this particular example, wherein we have this variable called profitability, and this is the company which you are seeing, company number 3, ABC Gas. Okay, and let's say if I want to calculate the forward orthogonal deviation for this particular company for profitability, then let's say for this particular year, okay, in which the value is 0.00518, what will I do is I will calculate the mean of the forthcoming values. Okay, and these forthcoming values, after calculating their mean, I will deduct that mean from the current value. And irrespective of the fact whether there are missing observations in the forthcoming years, doesn't matter, we will only consider the values which are present. So even if there is one value present, we will be able to calculate the forward orthogonal deviation value in case of all the variables. So the loss of information is less in forward orthogonal deviations as compared to first differencing, and that is why we use forward orthogonal deviations as a preferred mechanism in case of unbalanced panel data sets. So this is it. I will now close my GMMIV bracket for the first predetermined variable, that is L dot cash holdings. And now I will, I would just like to confirm, am I audible?
Yes, Pratik, go ahead.
Okay, great. So now we will open another GMMIV bracket for our next endogenous variable, which is, let's say, liquidity. Okay, so I put in liquidity. Again, now I put a comma in order to give options, and the first option is lag. So how many prior lags I want to use for liquidity as potential instruments, because liquidity is an endogenous variable like we discussed. So for endogenous variables, it is always advisable to start the lag length from 1. So this is what we will do. And the ending lag length, after giving a space, I will write as 4, because let's say I believe that values of liquidity 4 years prior, till 4 years prior, can be used as potential instruments for liquidity. Okay, and then I will close my bracket. Then model, I will again use FODEV, forward orthogonal deviations, in order to minimize loss of information, because I'm working on an unbalanced panel data set. I will close this bracket, and finally I will also open the GMM IV bracket once again for my last endogenous variable, which is profitability. I also discussed why profitability is being considered as an endogenous variable. I will put a comma, I will write lag bracket start. Again, I will, for simplicity purposes, I will give the lag lengths from 1 to 4. Then I will write model FODEV bracket close. All right. And now finally, I will open the bracket for exogenous variable, which I am assuming to be size. Okay, so firms usually, almost sort of irrespective of the fact that whatever is happening, it has been observed that across time, firms generally tend to grow in size. Okay, so that is why I am assuming size to be an exogenous variable. Although this might also be debatable, but just to show you, we are considering size as an exogenous variable. So I will give now. What happens in the case of exogenous variables is that you are assuming that these variables are not correlated with the error term. Okay, so which means you do not actually need to use any instruments for them. Why? Because in fact, these variables are the best instruments for themselves. Okay, so what we will do is that we will tell Stata to use size as its own instrument. Okay, and that is why I am using lag 0, 0. Okay, and then I will write the model option, and it is always a rule to write the model option as level for exogenous variables. Why? Because we do not want to do any transformation as such. We do not need any transformed values for these exogenous variables, because we do not want any instruments for them. If we do not want any instruments for them, then there is no need to do any transformation as such for these variables. So that is why we are telling Stata that use the values of these exogenous variables in the level equation itself. Okay, so don't transform them, and that is why we are writing the option as level in this bracket called model. Okay, and finally what we will do is that we will write no footnote, because there are additional information which command reports with regard to the number of instruments and which are the instruments which have been used, how many, like that, etc. We do not want that we do not want that information as of now, so we will write no footnote. Okay, now there's one thing that I want to tell you, that after specifying the lags, it is always advisable to use this option called collapse. Okay, so once you write the lag length, you should always write, at least initially when you start with the experimentation of your model, you should always write collapse. Now what collapse does is that it tries to reduce the number of instruments. Okay, and this is what we want. Why? Because higher the number of instruments, higher is the possibility of instrument invalidity, higher is the possibility of the problem of over identification. Okay, so what we tell the software is to collapse, that is to curtail the number of instruments as much as possible. So after lag, you should write collapse. It is always advisable to use as lesser number of instruments as possible. So after mentioning the lags for all the variables, I have written collapse, right? Okay, so now this is the basic command. I will now run it and see what output we get. All right, so this is the output we have got. All right, so let us now start interpreting the output. First of all, you have number of observations. So these are number of phone year observations that you have. Number of groups is the number of cross-sectional units that you have. In my case, it is number of companies. So we have 294 companies. Then this is the moment conditions, that is number of instruments that are currently being used in the estimation process. Okay, and we are using currently 25 instruments, right? And then you can see, WC Windmeyer corrected robust standard errors. This is because we have used two-step estimation procedure. And then you have the first independent variable as the lag of the dependent variable itself, that is L1 dot cache holdings. So this is the lag of the dependent variable, and you can see its value, its absolute value is between 0 and 1. and it is also statistically significant. So this looks absolutely fine, which means that yes, the lag of the dependent variable does have an impact on the current value of the dependent variable. And then we have independent variable, size, liquidity, profitability. So size is significant, liquidity is not significant, and profitability is significant. Great. And then since we had included time dummies, we have also got coefficients for each year. And these are not of interest to you. These are not of interest to us, so we'll just skip them. And now comes the diagnostic part, whether these results are valid or not. Okay, so let me basically take you to this word doc which I have prepared for the syntax. Okay, so this is the word doc. So this is basic the command we just used. Okay, and I have explained each option, each phrase in this particular syntax which appears. Okay, so two-step we have used. We have clustered our standard errors using VCE in order to correct for heteroscedasticity and autocorrelation. This we have done. Then no constant. If you want to run a regression without intercept, you can include this option called no constant. But we do not want to do that. We want the intercept to be calculated, so that is why we have not used this option called no constant. Then small option basically requests for t statistic instead of z statistic. So whenever you are working with potentially small samples, you can always write this option called small in the command in the end. And then t effects we have used, time effects, that is completely fine. Lags we have absolutely used for endogenous variables, that also we have discussed. Then model we have used FODEV, and why we have already discussed. Then collapse option we also have used. Why? Because we want to curtail the number of instruments, because lower the number of instruments, higher is the chances of instrument validity, which we will just check, how do we identify whether instruments are valid or not. And finally, no footnote. So basically it suppresses the display of additional information which we do not want. So that is why we have used no footnote. Now let me also highlight some basic thumb rules regarding system GMM estimation, which we should always try and follow. And we'll also see whether we have followed all those thumb rules or not. So the first thumb rule is always use two-step along with the robust and cluster ID option. So this is what we have done. Okay, we have used two-step estimation process, and we have also clustered our standard errors in order to eradicate potential issues arising out of heteroscedasticity and autocorrelation. The second thumb rule is Sargan-Hansen test. Now this is a diagnostic test which is a must. Okay, so now let us do this diagnostic test. So instruments which we have used, the lags of the levels and the lags of the transformed variables, these instruments which we have used, are they valid or not? The validity of the entire output depends on the fact whether your instruments are valid or not, which means whether they meet the two conditions of instrumental validity or not. And these two conditions which sir discussed as exclusion and relevance. Okay, so in order to check whether our instruments are valid or not, what we will do is we will type this command called estat over id. And all these commands which I am typing, they are already present in the do file which I have shared with you. So you can always copy those commands from there, and you can run this analysis on your own. Okay, so estat over id. So we want to check whether our model is over identified or not, whether our instruments are valid or not. And the null hypothesis is that yes, the instruments are valid. So let me press enter. Okay, now let us check the p-value. The p-value is 0.96, and for the two-step weighting matrix, and for three-step weighting matrix, it is also again 0.96. So yes, our instruments are valid. They are absolutely valid. Why? Because the null hypothesis is that instruments are valid, and this hypothesis is getting accepted, or rather I should say that this hypothesis is not getting rejected. So that is why we can be rest assured that our instruments are valid. Let me come back to the word doc for further some rules which we have regarding XTDPD GMM. So next is point number 3, avoid external instruments. So we have not used any external instruments. So basically external instruments are variables which are not present in the model, but you use them as instrument. Okay, so for example, in the previous example which sir was discussing, we had used mother and father education as instruments for the child's education. And these variables, father and mother education, these variables were not present in our model. So these are external instruments. Now while estimating dynamic panel estimation, it is always advisable to use internal instruments and not external instruments. And we have used internal instruments only. Why? Because we have used the lags of the endogenous variables as their own instruments. So we have not brought any fresh variable into the picture with regard to the instruments used in the model. Then the next thumb rule is always use time dummies. We have already included time dummies using the option called t effects. Then the next thumb rule is prefer using model FODEV. Again, this is what we have done. We have used forward orthogonal deviations. And then the next thumb rule is use cluster ID to cluster the standard errors around a cross-sectional dimension. Again, this is what we have done. We have clustered our standard errors around company ID, and this is actually what you should do. You should use the smallest level of the cross-sectional ID which you have in order to cluster your standard errors. Okay, so this is what we have done. We have clustered our standard errors around the company ID. And finally, look at this seventh uh, thumb rule, which is very important. So people who have basically suggested these commands and people who are experts of dynamic panel estimation, they say that whenever you do a Sargan-Hansen test for your instrumental validity, always ensure that your p values which you get for this hypothesis are not greater than 0.25. So basically they say that higher the value, especially if they, let's say, exceed the limit of 0.6, 0.7, then it is always said that the test itself fails. The results of these Sargan-Hansen tests, they become unreliable because the test has been constructed in such a way that higher p values means a lower power of the test. And what is happening in our case? Let's see. We are getting such a high value, such a high p value of the Sargan-Hansen test, 2-step as well as 3-step, 0.96. And ideally, if these values are greater than 0.6 or 0.7, we should not actually consider this output as valid. So what we can do? So ideally, we should so ideally we should change the specification of the model, or we can include the lags of the independent variables. We can include further lags of the dependent variable. And then there are options such as we can change the lag length criteria, or we can introduce, or we can eliminate this option called collapse. Just for illustration purposes, what will I do is I will remove this option collapse from the GMM IV bracket for the lagged value of cache holdings, and let's see what happens to the output. All right, and I will do the test again and see the p-value has drastically come down. Okay, so just by making these changes, by using or not using collapse option, or by changing the lag length of the endogenous variables, the predetermined variables, you can basically bring down the p-value of the Sargan-Hansen test. And this is part of experimentation in the sense that there is no hard and fast rule as to whether you should use the collapse option or not, whether you should increase the lag lengths to further periods, how many lag lengths should you use, what are the advisable values of these lag lengths. So there are no rules as such. So this is part of experimentation. It is just that you will have to theoretically justify as to why you are doing what you are doing. Okay. And the next diagnostic test which we need to check is we want to ensure that there is no second order serial correlation in the first difference error term. Okay, and for that there is a command called estat serial. Okay, this command is also mentioned in the do file which I shared with you. Okay, and we can very well see the result in front of us. So the first null hypothesis is that there is no autocorrelation of order 1, and ideally this hypothesis should get rejected. Why? Because we want the dependent variable to be autocorrelated of the first order, and this is why we have actually included the lag of the dependent variable as one of our independent variables. Okay, so this is in fact what we want. Okay, so no autocorrelation of order 1, the hypothesis gets rejected that yes, the dependent variable is autocorrelated of order 1. But with regard to autocorrelation of order 2, what we want is the condition, the assumption in system GMM is that there should be no autocorrelation of order 2, which means there should be no higher order serial correlation in the first difference error term. And this hypothesis is getting accepted, or rather I should say it is not getting rejected. Why? Because the p value is greater than 0.01, sorry, 0.10. Okay, so yes, this condition is also satisfied, and these are two diagnostic tests which are very, very essential in order to ensure validity of your output. Okay, so you should always run these two tests. So let me now come back to the PPT in order to revise what we have done so far. So we estimated the dynamic panel estimation for dynamic panel model for cash holdings, and we have also done the diagnostic tests. Now, what are the other things that we should take care of in order to ensure that our output is valid? Now we will discuss one by one all these pointers. Okay, the number one pointer is that your number of groups, that is number of cross-sectional units, should always be greater than number of instruments. Let us see whether this is happening in our result or not. Okay, so number of groups, that is number of companies which are considered in my regression, are 294, and the number of instruments are 38. So yes, obviously number of groups is greater than number of instruments, so this condition is satisfied, this thumb rule is satisfied. Okay, the next thumb rule is the absolute value of autoregressive coefficient of the dependent variable should be between 0 and 1, and it should be statistically significant. So this pointer is saying that when you include lag of the dependent variable as an independent variable in your model, it should actually come out to be significant, and its value, its absolute value, should be between 0 and 1. Let us see whether this is happening or not. So this is the coefficient. This is the coefficient, 0.1, 0.4100223. This is the coefficient for my lag dependent variable. So it is absolutely between 0 and 1. Its absolute value is between 0 and 1, and also it is statistically significant. So this criteria is also met, which means that yes, our dependent variable is following a dynamic data generating process. Moving forward, the next thumb rule is that the p-value of AR1 coefficient should be significant and AR2 coefficient should be insignificant. Okay, and we just checked it by using this command called estat serial. There is no autocorrelation of order 1. This hypothesis is rejected, and this is what we want. We want the value of AR1, the p-value of AR1 test to be significant, and it is significant in fact at 1%. Okay, the p-value is 0.0000, and then the next assumption is that there should be no autocorrelation of order 2, which means that there should not be any second order serial correlation, and this hypothesis is not rejected, and this is what we want. The p-value is 0.2265. Okay, so this hypothesis is accepted, and that is why this condition is also satisfied. Let us move to the other thumb rule, and the other thumb rule is that we should always check the validity of our instruments using this command called estat over id, and the instruments should be valid. Okay, and we have already done this test, estat over id, right? And we have got results for 2-step and 3-step. Now the idea of 2-step and 3-step is that you should ideally report any one of these, and if you are running multiple models in your paper, in your thesis, then you should ideally choose one of these and report only values for one of these for all the regressions that you do. Okay, so ideally my suggestion would be to use 2-step weighting matrix and report its corresponding p values. Okay, and so basically the null hypothesis here is that the instruments are valid, they are satisfying the conditions of exclusion as well as relevance, and these null hypotheses are getting accepted. Okay, the p-value is 0.3751 in the case of 2-step, and in case of 3-step it is 0.3737. So again, this condition is also satisfied, instruments are valid, right? And so basically this slide tells you that your p-values for the Sargan-Hansen test, they should not exceed these ranges 0.6, 0.7. If they do, then you should ideally reduce the number of instruments in your model, or you should specification of your model, right? Then condition number 5, always use 2-step along with robust cluster standard errors. This is what we have done. Then avoid external instruments. We have not used any external instruments. Then always use time dummies. We have used time dummies. Then prefer using model FODV in case of unbalanced panels. This is what we have done. Then use cluster ID to cluster the standard errors. This is what we have done. Right. And yeah, so when using FODV transformation, start the lag length for predetermined variables from from 0. Okay, so start the lag length from 0 for predetermined variables. So in our case, our lag dependent variable, okay, our lag dependent variable was predetermined, and we have started its lag length from 0, and in fact we have ended also its lag length at 0. Then for endogenous variables, we should start the lag length ideally from 1, and this is what we have done. We have started the lag length for liquidity as well as profitability from 1, and we have ended the same at 4. Okay. Finally, if let's say you have two competing models between which you are not able to decide, let's say there are two models which are meeting the conditions of the assumption of no higher order serial correlation, as well as the instrument validity. Then in that case, how will we decide which model is better? Okay, so now I will give you an overview as to how do we select models in that case. So the do file which I had sent you has this command for the cash holdings regression. Okay, and I will just copy that command and I will run this model as well, so that we will have two models. Okay, so this is that command, and I will just press enter. So this is slightly a different command. Why? Because in this case, what we have done is that we have, in this case, ended the lag length for the lag of cash holdings at 1. Earlier, we had basically started and ended the lag length of lag dependent variable both at 0. But in this case, what we have done is that we have ended the lag length at 1. Okay, so the ending lag length for L dot cash holdings is 1. This is the only difference. Okay, and obviously we have different outputs. And as you can see that previously we had 38 instruments. Okay, and now since we have increased the lag length of the lag dependent variable, the instruments have risen to 51. Okay, and the values of all the coefficients have also slightly changed. And in fact, you can see that liquidity was earlier not coming out to be significant, but now it is coming out to be significant. So all the three independent variables are significant. So basically now we have two competing models. Okay, how do we select between these two competing models? So firstly, the model which I have just run from the do file, first let me check whether it is meeting the criteria of no second order serial correlation and instrumental validity or not. So I will run estat serial command, and I can very well see that it is satisfying the criteria of no higher order serial correlation, because the hypothesis is not rejected. P value is 0.2639. Okay, now let me also check instrumental validity. I will again run this command called estat override, and again, the P value is greater than 0.10, so the hypothesis is not rejected both for step as well as 3-step. The P values are 0.38. Both the models are actually satisfying the diagnostic tests. Now, how do I select between both these models? So what will I do? What will I do is I will calculate the information criteria, that is AIC, DIC, HQIC for both these models, and we know that lower the information criteria, better is the model, because it is able to capture more information efficiently. So after running the model, you have to run this command called estat MMSC, moment and model selection criteria, estat MMSC. I will run this command. Okay, so for this model, let us say we will consider as of now AIC. So the value of AIC is minus 30 for this particular model. Okay, now let me also run the previous model once again, so that I can calculate its information criteria as well. Right. So this is the other model. I will now run this command estat MMSC. Okay, and the moment and model selection criteria AIC, the value is minus 17, right? So we have two competing models now, and we have the corresponding information criteria values for both these models as well. So we know lower the value of these information criteria, better is the model. So for this model, we have information criteria AIC equal to minus 17. Okay, and for the previous model, we saw it was minus 30. So absolutely the previous model is better, in which we had actually ended the lag length for L dot cash holdings at 1. So this is also another guiding light, you know, for you to decide how many lag lengths should you use. Because when you change the lag lengths, you know, the not only the results will change, but these AIC, BIC, HQIC figures will also change. And you can, you know, select a model based on these criterias. Okay, so in order to select between two competing models which satisfy all the assumptions, you can always use this command called estat moment and model selection criteria. Okay, let me come back to the PPT now. Now, what are the additional advantages of using this GMM? Let us see. You know, so in system GMM, the coefficients for all the independent variables that we get, you know, these are short-run coefficients. Why? Because every independent variable actually does not only impact the contemporaneous value of the dependent variable, but also the future values of the dependent variables. Let us see how. So on the screen right now, you see the same model which has been written for time period t-1 and for time period t and for time period t. Okay, so the equation above which you see right now, let me just highlight it. Right. So this equation, okay, this equation which you see, the first equation has been defined at time t-1 and the equation below has been defined at time t. This is the only difference. Okay, now consider this variable called xit-1. So xit-1 has definitely an impact on yit-1. That is why we have included it as an independent variable. But you know, xit-1 also has an impact on yit. How? Because we know for a fact that yit-1 also impacts yit. So, you know, let me just show you this once again. Right. So, you know, this variable, okay, this xit-1 definitely has an impact on yit-1. But this yit-1 is already an independent variable in the next period. So yit-1 is absolutely impacting yit. That is why we have included it as an independent variable. So basically xit-1 has an impact on yit through yit-1, right? So xit has an impact on yit through yit-1. Okay, and in similar manner, you know, xit-1 will not only impact yit, it will also then go on to impact yit plus 1, because then yit will become an independent variable. So basically xit-1 has an impact not only on the contemporaneous value of the dependent variable, which is this, but it also has an impact on the future values of the dependent variable through the lagged value of the dependent variable. Okay, because xit-1 has an impact on yit-1 and yit-1 has an impact on yit. So in a way we can say that xit-1 has an impact on yit. So how will we calculate the consolidated impact of xit-1 on our dependent variable? Because xit-1 is not only impacting yit-1, it is also impacting future values of the dependent variable. Okay, so there is a formula for that, because you know, see, if we start calculating the impact of xit-1 on the future values of the dependent variable, it will actually become a GP series. Okay, and the sum of a GP series is A upon 1 minus R. A is the starting term and R is the common ratio. Okay, so in dynamic panel estimation, there is always an option to calculate the consolidated impact of the independent variable on the dependent variable. So there's a command for that, and we will now run that command. Okay, and this command, you know, I have already mentioned it in my PPT, right? So we will run this command now. So let's say, you know, in my model, I want to see the long run impact of liquidity on cash holdings. Okay, so NLCOM stands for non-linear combination. So this is the syntax for the command. It is already mentioned in my PPT. You can take it from there. And now this command we will run and see the long run impact of liquidity on cash holdings. Okay, and you can see the coefficient is minus 0.046, and it is not statistically significant, you know. So this is the advantage of system GMM regression. This is the advantage of dynamic panel estimation. A variable which might be significant in the short run might not be significant in the long run. Okay, so in our case, liquidity does have a significant impact in the short run, or rather for in this model in short run also it doesn't have. So in fact, let me run the previous model and then in fact calculate the long run impact of liquidity, right? Okay, so we can see that you know, for the previous model, liquidity has a long run impact as well. So it has a short run impact, it has a long run impact, and the coefficients are also different. Okay, and both these impacts, long run and short run, are statistically significant. So in this way, for any variable, for any independent variable, you can calculate the long run impact that it has on your dependent variable, because the coefficients which you see in the output, generally these are short run impacts. Okay, these are short run effects of the independent variables on your dependent variable. Okay, so one advantage is that we can calculate the long run impact of the independent variables on a dependent variable. The next advantage is that you can always calculate the speed at which your dependent variable adjusts towards its optimal level, adjusts towards its target level. You know, so you know, in case of dynamic panels, you know, our dependent variable we know is autoregressive. So you know, in many cases, theoretically, the dependent variable is actually following an error correction mechanism, so to say. You know, it is actually trying to reach a particular optimal level. So you know, let's say in case of cash holdings, higher cash holdings are also bad and lower cash holdings are also bad. So it is assumed theoretically that firms adjust toward their optimal level in due course of time. But how will we find that how much time is taken by a particular firm on an average to reach its target level of cash holdings? So for that, we will have to use this formula, which is 1 divided by 1 minus beta, and here beta is nothing but the coefficient of your lagged dependent variable. Okay, so let us say in our case, the lagged dependent variable has a coefficient of 1 divided by 1 minus beta. Beta in our case is 0.3958787. Okay, so I have basically written down that value. So this is the formula for calculating the time which the dependent variable will take in order to reach its optimal value. So this is the formula which we need to use in order to calculate the time which a dependent variable takes in order to reach its target level. Okay, and I will press enter, and what and the value we get is 1.65. So you know, you have to now interpret this value of 1.65 in the units of time that you have used. So in our case, we are working on annual data. So this means that a particular firm on an average takes 1.65 years in order to reach its target level. So you know, less than 2 years but greater than 1.5 years. So you know, somewhere around, let's say, 18 months. Okay, yeah, so basically 18, 19 months, right? So this is the time which a particular firm on an average takes in order to reach its optimal level, target level. And you know, for whichever dependent variable you run your dynamic panel, you can always calculate this time of adjustment which the dependent variable takes in order to attain its target level. So this formula also we have mentioned in the PPT, so you can always use this formula. Now, finally, we need to remember that dynamic panel estimation is not only, sort of precise and very accurate in terms of the fact that it addresses endogeneity issues, but it also has a lot of conditions, a lot of assumptions which are to be met. So, you know, let us have a look at all such, concerns, all such conditions, which are to be satisfied whenever we use dynamic panel estimation. So, you know, like I said, that let me just go back to the output which we got. Yeah. So let me run the command once again. So this is the command which we ran. Okay, so now I have basically designed this command in such a way that all the conditions, all the diagnostic tests are being satisfied. Okay, but now let us suppose that these diagnostic tests, so basically the assumption of no second order serial correlation as well as the assumption of instrument validity, let us suppose these are not getting satisfied. So if, let us say, instead of this value 0.2639, if we would have got a value less than 10%, a value less than 0.10, then what is the potential solution? How can we actually get this null hypothesis to not get rejected? How can we try and get a value which is higher than 0.10? Okay, so now the solution is, first of all, we should check the specification of our model, whether we have considered all potential determinants of the dependent variable or not. Okay, if we believe that theoretically we are missing out on important independent variables, then definitely we should include them. In fact, the focus should be to include the higher lags of the dependent variable. Okay, so in our model, we only included the first lag. You can also include the second lag. Okay, so L2 dot cache holdings. This is one of the solutions in order to get your assumption of no second order serial correlation to be satisfied. So we can also include the higher lags of the dependent variable as independent variables. Okay, and we can see, in fact, see the second lag of the dependent variable is also significant. Okay, and its absolute value is also between 0 and 1. So this is what you can do. Other than this, you can also try and include higher lags of the existing independent variables. So as of now, what we have done is we have only included the values, the contemporaneous values of all our independent variables. So one solution in order to get this AR2 satisfied is to include lags of the independent variables also. Okay, so and how will we do that? So for example, I can include the second lag, or rather the first lag of liquidity. I can write L1, or rather just L dot liquidity. Okay, and also I can mention this in the GMMIV bracket which I opened for liquidity. So basically all variables which you have as independent variables, they should ideally be put into at least one of the GMMIV brackets. Okay, whether you assume them to be endogenous or exogenous, you have to put all the independent variables, including the lag of the dependent variable, in one of the GMM IV brackets. This is mandatory. Okay, so I will just copy the first lag of the liquidity variable which I have just introduced as an independent variable, and I will also include that in this GMM IV bracket, and I will again run my model. Right, so now you have basically liquidity, the contemporaneous value, as well as the lag of liquidity. But as you can see, both of these variables have become insignificant. So this I am showing you this only for experimentation purposes. So the model specification completely depends on your theory, the empirical literature which corresponds to your topic, and from that you should get guidance as to which variables should you include, whether you should include lags or not. Right, so basically from my side, the guidance in order to ensure that AR2 test is not rejected is to basically check specification of your model, whether you have omitted any important independent variable or not, and finally to include the higher lags of the dependent variable, and also lags of the existing independent variables, and you might actually get your AR2 condition satisfied. Now the next diagnostic test, which is the instrumental validity, the diagnostic test, organization test for instrumental validity. So for our model, the instruments were coming out to be valid, but let us say if the null hypothesis gets rejected, if let us say the p values are less than 10%, so how will we ensure that these values go beyond 10%? So the potential
Pratik,
solutions,
Pratik,
yeah,
wind up करो इसको.
ठीक है. So I will just try and wind up this discussion soon. So okay, specification, you can check of your model. If you are missing any important variables, independent variables, you can include them. Then you can include higher lags of the dependent variable again, and you can also try and include lags of the independent variables. Then the most important thing is that you can basically examine the categorization of independent variables which we have done, into predetermined, endogenous or exogenous. So basically this categorization actually impacts your results drastically. If this categorization is wrong, then you might not get reliable results, and in fact your diagnostic tests may also not get satisfied. So this is something which is related to the theory of the topic. So you should always try and think about whether a particular variable is endogenous, predetermined, or exogenous, and then you should accordingly treat that variable in your command. And finally, you can also try and use the collapse option in order to reduce the number of instruments, because higher the number of instruments, lower are the chances for the Sargan-Hansen test to get satisfied. So that is why you can try and reduce the number of instruments by using the collapse option. And finally, you can also change the value of maximum lag length. So for example, if you want to reduce the number of instruments further, then let us say instead of 1 to 4, you can use only 1 to 2, because this will also reduce the number of instruments that will get employed in the model. Okay, and in this way you can try and get your Sargan-Hansen satisfied. Okay, so right. Finally, you should always keep these issues in mind, which are mentioned on your screen right now. So system GMM can easily generate invalid estimates if you do not use
Uh,
its options
Pratik, we
correctly.
are going to share this PPT with them. Limitations, they can read themselves. Okay.
Okay, so finally, then I will come to the last part of my discussion, which is the reportage of results. So, once you get the results, you should first of all know how to export the same into a Word doc. And for that, again, there is this command. So you can use this command, which I will just, copy from my do file for illustration purposes. So first of all, what you have to do is that you have to store the model which you are running. Okay, so let us suppose I have run this model. I will store its output by using this command called est store. Okay, and this output will get stored in the memory of Stata. And how will I export it to Word doc? So there is a command for that. I have already mentioned that command in the PPT. So you can just run this command. The command is est tab. Okay, and I will just press enter. Okay, and you will see that there is a Word doc which has been created. If I click on this Word doc, it will open and the results will appear in the same manner in which we actually want to report these results for our research paper purposes. So you can see the results have appeared. Okay, and while reporting results for dynamic panel estimation, what are the things that you should ideally report. So basically I have a table in which I have these dynamic panel results. So I will just show you what are the things that you need to compulsorily mention. Yeah, so see, this is a table which shows results for dynamic panel regression. So obviously you will show the coefficients for all your independent variables, including the lag of your dependent variable and standard errors in the bracket. And after that, you will show the intercept, its coefficient value and also its standard error. And now these are the things that you should ideally mention as part of your dynamic panel results. Okay, you should mention the time period for which the analysis has been done. Then you should mention whether you have included time dummies or not. Okay, then you should mention the number of Fermier observations which appear at the top right corner of your output in Stata. You should also mention number of firms which were number of cross-sectional IDs which were included in the regression. This also appears on the top right corner of your output in Stata. Then number of instruments. This also appears in the output of Stata. Number of instruments you should mention. Then you should mention the result, the p-value of AR1 test as well as AR2 test. You just need to mention the p-values, and finally the values of the p-values of the Sargan-Hansen test. Okay, and like I said, you can always go for the two-step weighting matrix while reporting Sargan-Hansen test. Okay, so this is how you report your result in Stata. All of these things I mentioned in this slide,
And if you
and
do
these are
more
finally the
practice, you will
references.
learn it. Practice will make you perfect.
Absolutely.
Uh, so these
And these
are
are
the,
the
we will
reports.
share all this in our PPT, right, Pratik? That
Yeah.
you can skip.
Right. Okay. Okay. So that's all from my side. I hand over the baton to sir now.
Okay. Uh, just I share my screen with you. So, friends, we are coming to an end. Hopefully, these all are from our side. And finally, we believe that a new knowledge is taking birth in us. And thank you very much for us being with us. And hopefully that at the end you must be feeling comfortable with the panel data analysis. But don't forget, still it's a long way to go. Don't forget these words of Robert Frost that says miles to go before I sleep. And the more you practice, you will become master of the things. Must be feeling happy at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor C.P. Gupta, sir, and Mr. Pratik Bedi for the wonderful sessions. I like to mention C.P. Gupta, sir's dynamic personality and dynamic approach make these dynamic concepts super simple and super interesting. It's always an enriching experience and
Thank you,
knowledgeable sessions
Anshika.
from
Thank
you,
you.
sir. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
Thanks a lot. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
sir.
And have a good time, good learning. Thanks a lot to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Okay, thank
Pratik,
you
sir.
everyone. Thanks.